Welcome back to the Herbalist Hour. Today, I'm really excited to have on Brandon Ruiz. Welcome to the show, Brandon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Welcome to the Herbalist Hour. This is where community gather, merging the power of people and the flowers, the sweet and the bitter to the salty, the sour. Umami, it's time for the Herbalist Hour.
We just missed each other at the Great Lakes Herb Fair somehow, but now we get to do it via Zoom at the very least. So I'm really excited. I've been looking forward to this interview. I had a lot of fun writing out some questions for you. But why don't we kick things off? I know you just completed your Caribbean herbalism course out at, I want to say, the Wild Ginger Herbal Community Center over in Costa Rica. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience there?
Yeah, so that was a 10-day course that I just did. Just finished it about a week ago. It was the first thing of its kind, really. I've been teaching the subject of Caribbean herbal medicine for a couple of years now. It started as a 2-hour class. It turned it into a online course that was about 20 hours, roughly 5 classes or so, or no, 10 classes, 20 hours total. And then I really want to do it in person, which, can be harder when it comes to getting people together. But it really worked out beautifully. It filled up really fast. And that was in Manzanillo, Costa Rica, on the Caribbean coast. A lot of people from different backgrounds within and outside of the Caribbean. And it was just a really amazing opportunity to work with Caribbean herbal medicines from, a platform that I think isn't always found really easily. I think in my experience learning about the subject, it's harder to find established programs or literature or certain things on it, or if there is, it's limited. And so with the Wild Ginger Herbal Center, I was able to collaborate with them and make that happen recently, and it went really, really amazing. I'm healing and being cold now in the Northeast, but I'm definitely reminiscing and still there in the warmth. So,
Where are you at now in the Northeast?
New York City.
Oh, wow. Are you leading workshops out there?
Here and there, I'm working on some programming for the upcoming in the spring, some online stuff as well. But I relocated up here a few months ago.
So you live there now?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Because I want to say you're from Charlotte, North Carolina originally.
I was raised in Charlotte. Yeah, I was born in Florida, raised mostly in Charlotte, North Carolina. And a majority of the work and stuff that I've done there has been there. So,
do you think you'll go back to Charlotte at some point to live?
I think for the work things, yeah, I feel like I'll definitely be around and do some stuff. Over time, when you're in one place for so long, you get to know the ins and outs. And I think if the place doesn't feel like it has the capacity to hold your growth, then sometimes you head other places. So
I love it. Yeah, I was born and raised I wasn't born there, but I was raised in Eugene, Oregon, for almost my entire life, and now I live in Wisconsin, and it was just kind of a nice change of pace for me. But going back to your Caribbean herbalism course that you were just teaching in Costa Rica, how many people signed up for it, or how many people were there, and do you plan on doing it again next year at the same location?
Yeah, it was about 12, 13
Nice.
people total. Yeah, it filled up totally. I wanted to max out, and then I had to also look at the logistics of how many people can fit in a van and how many people can go around and do it.
Sure.
So that seemed like a really good number too, because it kept it more personal with specific questions, people's experiences. And yeah, definitely, I believe I'm planning to do one in fall. I think it's a lot easier to get people to warm places when it's very cold.
Right.
I don't know how the response would be in the summer, but I think I'm hoping to keep it consistent, like maybe twice a year when it's colder. So
sweet. Well, we'll be looking out for that, and be sure to follow Yuka Farms. Did I get that right?
Yuka Farms, yeah.
Farms on Instagram, where you could stay abreast of all of Brandon's events and courses, etc. So we'll get more into that later, though. But I would like to kind of take a step back and learn more about Brandon as a young kiddo. How did you get into herbalism, and maybe kind of talk about who some of your mentors have been, etc.
Yeah, over the course of the time that I've been working with plant medicine, which I feel like I started getting into it more intentionally when I was about 16 or so. In high school, I had a teacher who's a photography teacher, some completely unrelated, but was always like making juice and doing wheatgrass and stuff like that. And I think she saw my interest of like, what's up with the green juice you have And so I ended up, she kind of fostered that and would be like, you want to grow wheatgrass? I'll show you how to make juice, this. So the evolution of it was kind of like I got into juicing and,
Sure.
plant-based diets and things like that. And the idea of like health foods or eating things that were considered good for me, or, like this word superfood. And then as I got more
I'm gonna
into
ask you about that later. Sorry to interrupt, but
yeah,
I'm gonna ask you about that later. So, but yeah,
I'm
please
always like, got
continue.
my fingers in the frame so I can show them the quotes.
Totally.
Yeah, that whole concept, and over time being like, oh, there's like a lot of these random plants aside from the ones that are marketed and branded a certain way that are really great for you. And so my education with that was kind of on my own sort of thing at the beginning of that journey. I know after high school, I did it was like a plant-based nutrition course with Cornell. They have like an online program for that. And after that, it was more, I'm in the woods, I'm learning and like trying to ID plants. In 2017 or 16, I took I think it's the holistic herbalism course, like a 6 month thing with Corey Pine Shane
Oh,
and at the
nice.
Blue Ridge School of Herbal Medicine. And that was really helpful. That was a big focus on a lot of the more, Western herbs and Appalachian herbs. Before all of this, I was introduced one of the plants that actually comes up that I know I did a monograph for
Sorry.
with HerbRally was noni juice.
Mm.
And my grandmother would give me that. She sent it when I had this really crazy tonsil infection, and they were going to take my tonsils out. And she sent it to me, and within a week or so, the infection was gone. And there was sort of, and I think this is a relatable thing for a lot of people, especially of the diaspora who don't grow up within the countries where their families are from. I wasn't super connected a lot of the times with certain, foods or practices or certain things like that. And
Totally.
so over time, my interest that builded with it when I started to practice herbal medicine was like talking to my family members and going to Puerto Rico and like being able to see the stuff that grows around and listening like that. And so I definitely feel like for a majority of the time I've had working with plant medicine, I did a lot of like just sort of self-education, being in the
Sure.
woods, learning about those things, and then doing the same in the tropics, especially in Puerto Rico, and like developing this sort of identity for things to say, I love these plants. I love Appalachia and, the Blue
Sure.
Ridge Mountains and all these things. But I feel more of a connection in the Caribbean. And so
Absolutely.
having both of those as my basis of like my herbal knowledge feels really cool because I can kind of connect with two different worlds.
Mm.
Um, but but yeah, so I would say, overall, I think that teacher was a big help that kind of like opened me up to it as something to be intentionally interested in. But it was also fostered once I asked the questions and communicated with my family as like, oh yeah, that's a thing.
Yeah, you've written about your abuela or your abuelas before, and I'm kind of curious, have they taught you, say, food is medicine, or was it just kind of part of daily life for you, or how do you look at your family and specifically your abuelas as your teachers?
Yeah, on my mother's side, so both of my grandparents, both my abuelos on her side, they live together in Guaynabo, Puerto Rico. They just grew up a very specific lifestyle of being out in the mountains, like in
Yeah.
very rural areas, living off the land, whether it's the food or the herbal medicines and things like that. And over time, just developing something that is very common knowledge, like a lot of people in different parts of the world. You develop this sort of idea. People don't call themselves an herbalist or a farmer or whatever. It's just
Right.
about how you exist.
Right.
And so on that side of the family, for sure, a lot of support with like the interest in it and telling me things about it or answering questions or different traditions. On my dad's side, so my dad is half Puerto Rican and then half his mother's a Polish Jew.
Hmm.
And she is super into, my grandfather had passed when I was pretty young. So I didn't have too much of a connection in this realm with him on that. But my grandmother is still here and she's really into what I do in general. She
That's
supports it a
cool.
lot with like the food aspect, with the herbalism aspect, with the whole, teaching or whatever else it is. But has always definitely been like that in general with me. She told me one time as a kid, she came and like babysat me, and I had all these like Vienna sausages or something, and she would like switch them out for soy sausages or little things like he has to have this food, he has to whatever. And so I think that influence was there, and she fostered that. And then in looking for it more with my other side of the family, it was also very, very prominent. So
How old are you now, Brandon?
26.
26. Okay. That's what I saw a post where you were teaching at the International Herb Symposium, and I want to say you said you were 26 in that post. So maybe that was just
Yeah, it was
recently.
like right on my birthday. Yeah.
Yeah, that was so cool. And you were telling me, oh, I got into like juicing and, all that hippie shit, back in the day when you're like, what, 15, 16. And it's just so awesome that 10 years later you're teaching at the International Herb Symposium. I don't know. I just thought that was really cool.
Yeah, it really is. I think sometimes I have a mindset about like creating things or teaching or material or whatever, this idea of growth that I get really rigid with. But
Uh-huh.
I think it is really cool to look back and be like, wow, like what a change in how things change over time, and
Yeah.
how at that point I wouldn't have even fathomed like teaching people or talking. I remember like when I would first start teaching, it was funny. I'm still, I think, learning more about this, but I would write down and be like, this is exactly what I'm going to say. And every bullet point, every whatever, it has to be exactly 45 minutes or something like that. And
Mm,
now, I've done like 5, 6 hour things where I don't have notes. I'm
that's
like,
amazing.
it happens more organically. I'm sure, like, because, I'm doing this. It's kind of like talking with a friend. Like you talk about it, it's an organic conversation. You're interested in these things. You have all these side notes. And the more rigorous sort of setup or structure of it, I think it makes it more difficult for my brain at least. But yeah, over time, I think seeing the journey that has been really, really cool.
I very much resonate with that. That was one of the reasons I put off doing the podcast for so long, was because I just didn't really know how to do it. And I was incredibly intimidated by it. I was like, how do you interview someone? And now that I'm doing it, you kind of pick up the ins and outs of it, and you get better hopefully over time. And it sounds like you're doing that with teaching. Do you kind of view yourself, have you always kind of been like a natural born teacher, or is it something you've just developed over time?
Maybe, I don't
Yeah.
know, because I don't think I was ever put in other situations where I was in that way.
Yeah.
I feel like growing up, I was kind of in my own sort of thing, not really like the person to like gather a group together, be like the
Mm,
leader.
sure.
But I think personally, I feel like because I'm passionate about it and because I will talk about it
Yeah.
unnecessarily in other situations, when I get the opportunity to talk about it intentionally, it's like, oh, I can do this forever.
For sure.
So I think that maybe I've developed it over time, but also still learning it because I didn't really think of the idea of teaching when I first got interested in it.
Absolutely. Just a quick break from the show to thank our presenting sponsor, Oshala Farm. Oshala Farm is a beautiful and vibrant certified organic herb farm based in Southern Oregon, where they grow and sell over 80 different plant species. The founders, Elise and Jeff Higley, have been longtime friends, so I highly trust their growing methods and ethics. You'll love the potency and vibrancy of all the herbs they have to offer. To learn more and purchase their herbs and other organic goods, head to oshalafarm.com. So thanks once again to Oshala Farm for sponsoring the Herbalist Hour. Now back to the show. Enjoy. Well, it's a nice segue into talking about what you do at Yuka Farms. And again, help me if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, but I kind of do want to know what Yuka is, and I've got a couple theories. So I want to say it's a play on words. And you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I looked up the word Yuka, and one of the words for it was town or village, I want to say. So does that mean village farm? The other theory I have is, I know that you love yucca, which I want to talk about more with you later. And I translated yeke. One of the translations was cuckoo. And I thought maybe you're cuckoo for yucca, for yucca. But anyways, that's all for funsies right there. But yeah, tell us what Yuka is, and the mission and so on.
Yeah, I've never taken the time to take it apart and see it in that way, but I see yucca as like one part of it.
Yeah.
In my awareness of it, at least from the Taino language, which is an Arawakan language indigenous to the Caribbean, yuka is basically, when one word is the space. It's usually a community or a town or like a
Oh,
small
cool.
area, but it's also the space in that area where the food is grown. And yucca kind of takes the forefront as being a very prominent cultural crop.
Mm.
that was used for everything from food and medicine, poison, all sorts of things. And so, yeah, the Yuka is kind of like the place of cultivation traditionally in a community.
Okay.
And I guess it's weird because, I think when you label or you name a farm or you name a something that's a physical space, putting farms after it is like, huh? So it kind of takes its own role to like, the place where the food is grown, farm where the food is grown.
Right.
But I guess organically or just said in a casual way, like the name of it, Yuka Farms, yeah, it's like the intention is that where the food is grown for the project and for the farm is in that same way. It's a communal sort of process, growing traditional crops and things like that.
Okay. So when I first became aware of your work, it was all about the Charlotte Hill. Sorry,
Charlotte Herbal Accessibility Project. Yeah.
You got
Long,
it.
very
Thanks.
long name.
Yeah, yeah. The CHAP. Chat.
CLTHAP. And or you could
Oh,
just
see, all right.
because Charlotte would use CLT. And that's
That's right.
also why I changed it, because for some reason I bought a domain that was CLT Herbal Accessibility Project. And over time I was like, I can't keep doing this.
You were probably only 22 at the time. You were going through the learning phase.
Yeah, I was like, oh, perfect. I'll just get a URL that's exactly what the project is. Nobody will have that. And then I was like, hey, people would be like, where can I find you online?
Yeah.
I'd be like, I'm gonna have to email it to you or text you.
Yeah.
I tell you now, it's gonna take a while.
I love it. I'm just kind of curious if the Charlotte Herbal Accessibility Project changed into the Yuka Farms project. Is it kind of along the same wavelength?
Yeah. Over time, I want to say before the Charlotte Herbal Accessibility Project, I started a small product line that was called Atere Correto Medicinals. That was tinctures, teas, and salves, and whatever other sort of thing. Starting the Charlotte Herbal Accessibility Project, that happened in about 2017. I started it on near the intersection kind of 36th Street and North Davidson and the east side of Charlotte. And there was a community garden that it was told to me there's not a lot of engagement in it. The person running it is kind of occupied with other things. And so it was a friend of mine, Walker, was like, hey, do you want to use a garden? When I started it for maybe like a month, the idea in my head was, how cool would it be to have like a mobile herbal center? And which was a little less feasible because I was like, now I'll buy a van.
Right.
But at the time that was offered to me, and I was like, oh, maybe I'll start from growing things, and so I started growing in that garden. It was probably like a quarter of an acre. It really wasn't that big, but it was, you can do a lot in a small amount of space. And I started to grow veggies, medicinal herbs, things like that. And over time, listening and connecting with a lot of community members, growing more culturally relevant crops. At one point, one of the seasons, we had pigeon peas or gandules, we had yucca, sugarcane, papaya trees. Like it was a whole tropical, especially sort of thing. And that started to happen because of my personal background and growing my traditional crops, but also what a lot of other people in the area might have been into: hibiscus, turmeric, lemongrass, things like that. And I would sell to different restaurants, chefs, things. And over time, I made products with that too. I would do farmers markets. Over time, the idea of having the product line and then having this, it's kind of like I'm just doing the same thing in different places. And then again, with the long name, of maybe 3 years in, I was like, I think I'm going to combine it all into something. Because at that point, I started to also do a lot of online education, which was the other branch that I think kind of completes it. It was making medicine, teaching about it, and growing it. And so Yuka Farms for me was kind of a combination of that, even in this sort of, I don't know if the term is like interim where I'm in now, where I'm not actively farming on something. I'm kind of figuring that out in the upcoming season, as well as putting more presence into the online world and reaching more people. I think with like educational opportunities, it's reached a balance in that, where I think now Yuka Farms is all of that. It's cultivating things, it's education in a lot of different realms, in person and digital. It's making things sometimes. So yeah, it's evolved into that.
Yeah. Do you have a website for Yuka Farms? Because I want to say a lot of times on your Instagram page, you'll say, just email me to register and that kind of thing. So how do folks, learn more about your courses and different offerings? Is that the best way, is the Instagram page?
Yeah, Instagram and then the email, which
Okay,
is literally yukafarms@gmail.com.
awesome,
That's how
simple.
things have gone after doing two different, because again, the other part of having the whole product line and the project, I had separate websites. So I was doing orders and I was doing emails to people to have orders for food, and I was like, this is a lot. And so I turned those off, although maybe one of them is still online. Um, I'm hoping to over the next year really get a website developed that can make educational opportunities um, more available or easier to sort of figure out. I do them all through, just that sort of more smaller scale thing. I'm not running classes with hundreds of people on them, but I'm hoping to eventually automate my educational offerings that way because I love the personable aspect of being able to do a class and people ask questions, things like that. But it also makes sense to me if I have 6 different classes going on at one time. Sign up for this one. You can sign up consecutively. I don't have to be present 24/7 to, regulate all the things.
Totally.
So workshop in the work or website in the works, but yeah, tentatively through Instagram and the email is kind of where getting with the offerings and different things happens.
Awesome. And just for the listener, I heard of Brandon's work through as I mentioned, the Charlotte Herbal Accessibility Project. I remember when I worked at Mountain Rose Herbs, you were one of the first winners of the Grants for Plants, uh,
Yeah.
that whole Grants for Plants project that they had going on. And I just got to say, right when we saw your video, we immediately fell in love with you, the work that you do, and it was just so cool to see what you were doing. And it's been fun to watch your journey along the way. So it's neat to see it evolve and change. And now you're in New York City doing new things. And just for you, Brandon, I don't know if you've heard of like say Kajabi. I don't use Kajabi, but a lot of the people who do herbal online education stuff, that's a platform that they use and constantly recommend to me. We're on Squarespace. Squarespace works pretty much fine for what we're trying to do, but yeah, I would say maybe look into Kajabi. That could be a good tool for you to use. But
Cool. Thank
what
you. Yeah. I haven't heard of
yeah,
it.
I think there's different tiers as with all these online software, but yeah, I would say look into it. I want to say they've got like a community aspect and just a place to house all of your different already pre-recorded online offerings. So awesome. Well, I think we should talk about some plants. I got 3 plants that I'd like to talk to you about, or
Cool.
have you talk to us about. But a couple of them are going to be, like you've already written about one of them on HerbRally, as you mentioned, and I've already mentioned yucca. I'd like to talk about that. But first, let's kick things off with tamarind. So tamarind, I recently bought for I want to say it was a Thai dish that we made, and so now I have a bunch of this tamarind in my fridge, and it's fascinating to me because I never really had much of a relationship with it. But I saw you post about it. I want to say quasi recently on your Instagram page. Can you tell us a little bit about tamarind, why you love it, what people use it for, etc.?
Yeah, totally. Tamarind is a really, I think I remember I made that post because I made some fresh tamarind juice at one point.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, tamarind is a really prominent one, especially in Caribbean herbal medicine, but like throughout the tropics. It's something that's been so naturalized. They're just these huge trees that develop over time. And when they start to fruit, it's like they're covered. And so with how much that they really have, you know, they tend to be pretty abundant when people do have them, which is I think where the idea of juice comes in. They're native to Africa originally, and then were brought into the Caribbean. And they're one of my favorites alongside things like hibiscus, as like really cooling tart medicines. And something that's really interesting to know or to think about that I get fascinated with is the way that plants come from where they originate and then how different cultures or their diaspora of where they come from use of them a certain way. So like tamarind is really used for the pulp. We'll, soak it, separate it from the seeds, and then blend that with water, add some sugar or something, and that's, tamarind juice. Whereas in traditionally within Africa, the bark is used, the leaves, the seeds. There's spiritual significance to the trees, which also pass into some parts of the Caribbean as well. So it's one of those that, yeah, it carries a lot of history with it, especially. But tamarind is definitely one of my favorite in the summertime
Mm.
to like cool down. Just even you can even get the pulp, which is like it already has the seeds out, and then blending it down with water. Some people will boil it, but I usually just blend it. Water, a little bit of sugar, maybe honey or something, so it's not
Sure.
super intense, which is nice though, because sometimes it's really hot. You want to cool down, your blood sugar's low. It like helps to really revitalize in that way. But yeah, it's definitely one of my favorite for that. And I was experimenting with some recipes, a Trinidadian recipe specifically,
Mm.
doubles, if you've ever tried that,
No.
which is really delicious. It's basically, it's like on this bread called bara, which is like a fried bread. And then they cook down the chana or the chickpeas with curry spices and potatoes and things. Usually has like a pepper sauce, like a hot sauce, and then a tamarind chutney. And so I made it and I was like, I really want to make
Damn.
good tamarind chutney. Yeah, and it was really, really delicious. And so I haven't really used tamarind in that way. I know that I've seen sauces with it, I've seen things like that. And I wouldn't say, in Puerto Rico specifically, maybe sometimes use it in that way.
Mm.
But after making the chutney, I was like, I have to make this on a regular basis. It's really good.
That sounds dank. So Puerto Rican food, they do use tamarind on occasion then?
Usually like tamarind juice. I've seen
Oh,
in more
okay.
recent like people who are doing kombucha. I've seen tamarind kombucha. I
Oh,
have
wow.
seen some tamarind sauce from like smaller brands.
Sure.
Or maybe I'm trying to think of anything else. Juice is like one of the big things.
Okay. Awesome. Well, let's chat a little bit about Yuka. And just for the listener, if you're not already subscribed to the Petty Herbalist podcast, you'll know Karina and Asia have been on the show twice now. They've got a show called the Petty Herbalist podcast where they interview Brandon. I want to say you talk to them about Yuka for maybe 30 minutes or so, but we don't have that time right now today. Also, Brandon on occasion, I want to say, has a full 2-hour class on that as well, which you could probably sign up for in the future. So again,
Yeah.
follow Brandon on Instagram. But why don't you tell us, first of all, also, I got to say, I randomly saw it at the grocery store. I was like, oh shit, Brandon talks about this sometimes. So I did buy it. And now it's one of our quasi staple foods. And Amanda absolutely adores when I make yucca. So let's just hear about your love of yucca, maybe some of the benefits and what you like to do with it.
Yeah, totally. Yucca has definitely become, I'm thinking that actually the only tattoo I have is of
That's
yucca.
legit.
So,
Nice. I got dandelion on mine.
nice, nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's like
Yeah.
that's the spot, right? I was like, how do I show that?
That's right.
Um, but yeah, yucca is definitely kind of like I mentioned, even in the terminology of like Yuka farms, right? Like yucca
Mm,
is considered a staple, even spiritually, as like an embodiment of yukahu, which is
mm.
what I don't think it would be worded as a deity or a god within Taino religion, but what's described as a semi,
Wow.
which is basically like you would see these they're called trigolonitos, which are basically these like triangle pointed stones with the face on it, and it represents a summit in Puerto Rico specifically that was considered where yucahu would live. Yucahu would govern the farming of yucca, the fertility of the soil, harvests, and things like that. So in that sense, it's been a very spiritual connection, as well as feeding people for so long.
Mm,
And yucca was one of the first things that I really started to cultivate to like personify growing culturally relevant crops and Caribbean crops. Though it is something native to the Americas, so traditionally the Arawakan people have basically brought it from modern day like Amazonas, like the Orinoco River Valley of Venezuela, modern day, into the Caribbean and then cultivated it. Yucca at one point was brought by the Portuguese to Western Africa in about the 1600s. And even now, I think Nigeria is the biggest producer of yucca in the world now.
oh, wow.
Yucca is found everywhere throughout the world in the tropics and subtropics. It's a starchy root. Traditionally, within Caribbean culture, we will eat the root boiled, fried, mashed. In other parts of the world, especially West Africa, the ingenuity of like what is done with yucca is crazy. They make like gari, which is basically like toasting down the smaller bits of it. They've made basically, yucca flour, which you can use like any other flour. Yucca, all sorts of things. So there's a lot of different ways to make it. One of the sort of interconnected ways of using yucca is for making a dish called casabe, which
Mm,
varies in how it's prepared or what the name might be. But casabe, Casabe, because a lot of times you also see it called cassava.
Yep, I've
Um,
seen that.
Casabe is basically grated down yuca that is then it's pressed out of thing that has many different names. Sometimes it's called a cebucan. It's like a palm fiber woven thing that's pretty long, and when you sit on it and apply the pressure, it squeezes all of the juice out, because yucca actually is toxic raw. And so it presses all the water content out, and then from there, that's all sifted through and it's cooked on a flat cooking surface to make what sometimes people call it cassava bread. It's definitely
Mm.
different than bread. It's basically, very finely broken down yucca into a piece that I would say is more cracker-like and crunchy, but it does not spoil very easily. It's created the basis for a lot of foodways throughout the Caribbean. And you can see it reflected, especially like how it's made. That idea of grating, putting it in a woven basket and squeezing it out and then cooking it flat. You can see all throughout Central America, all throughout the Caribbean, all throughout South America, through different tribes and cultures. So that's like kind of the consensual way to prepare that dish. Um, and I've tried to incorporate it more into everyday life. You don't need like all of that, so to speak, to do
Right.
it at home. It's cool too, for
Yeah.
sure. But straining it, cheesecloth, pressing it out, cooking it over the surface, and making that sort of base in soups or with fish or whatever else it is really good. It's pretty flavorless, but it definitely carries things. At the grocery store, you can find like a garlic flavor or a
Hmm.
black pepper flavor, things like that. And so that's one of the ways that ancestrally is, a very specific way to prepare it. But yuca, boiled yuca, fried yuca, there's different things, especially in Puerto Rican culture, that when we make the masa, or like the batter, so to speak, for things like pateles, which is basically like, I don't want to compare it to a tamale, but it's basically wrapped in banana leaves, different
Hmm.
starches grated down, filled with meat, wrapped up, and then boiled. Um, Things like that, and a couple other dishes that off the top of my head are gone. I can taste them, and I can't think of. But it's really the basis for a lot of culinary development in the Caribbean, especially, and other parts of the world, where I've heard of people using yucca root and some of the starch and compounds for making some sort of biodiesel.
Oh, wow.
I've heard of, and another name for yucca is tapioca.
Right.
Tapioca, boba, things like that. That all comes from yucca. It comes from the starch in it. Um, and so it's made an imprint in so many different parts of the world. And for me, I think it's really cool to observe a plant with all of its cultural context, whether that's within the Caribbean, because we might have a plant that an island over, and there's plenty of examples of this. Like we might have a plant we use only the berries, but in Jamaica they use only the leaves. And so
Hmm.
this cross-cultural sort of idea and connection of understanding how these plants work, I think, is really important for how we relate to plants. And then in the world scheme of things, there's just hundreds of ways to prepare it. So that was like a really roundabout way to explain it without being like, all right, don't stop there, keep going. Talk for a while.
You did a
Yeah.
great job. How many times a week do you consume it, would you say?
It depending on like not what I have going on, but I've been a little all over the place recently, so I
Sure.
haven't as much. I
Yeah.
did get some the other day, and so I
Yeah.
just boil it, and
Okay.
then after that, I might fry it. I really like. There's a dish called Hibaritos, which is
Oh, yeah.
you tried. It's
I
basically
haven't, but I when I visited when I picked up my daughter in Chicago, there was a restaurant there that was selling Hibaritos, and
mm,
I was really bummed that they were closed.
yeah.
So I didn't get to
Yeah.
try it, but I was like, damn, I really want to have that. But you
Yeah.
were saying, I want to say in the Petty Herbalist podcast that instead of using, was it plantain, they're using yucca root. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
really awesome. It's another starch that can be fried and made into a crispy thing that's considered the bun. So yeah, a
Yeah.
lot
So
of
when we make it in our household, all we've really done is made like a mashed, like a boiled and mashed version of it, and it'll have like that those stringy fibers in it. And I was just kind of curious from an expert's perspective, that's just normal, right? That's to be
yeah.
expected.
There's
Okay.
a fiber that goes straight through the middle, and usually when you cut it, if you cut it in half and then in quarters, you can kind of get that out.
Yeah.
It usually makes it a lot. It always just depends though, because I'll cook yuca in a place where it's really fresh.
Yeah.
I think that it can develop a little more fibrousness, or that core fiber can get a little more dispersed and
Mm.
then get into other parts of it when it's shipped. Because when we get yuca from the grocery store, yuca spoils very fast. I've harvested yuca
Oh,
in a day and a half, it's rotten.
wow.
And so what they do is they cover it in that wax that stops that process from going, and then they ship it. And so usually that wax is not there. It's just a regular bark, which if you cut lightly into it and sort of pop it under, you can basically go around the whole root and take it off really easy.
Mm.
But that's the basis part of it, because I've harvested it before, and talked with. I remember I harvested it one time, the first time I grew it in Charlotte, and I talked with the chef, and he was like, if you could deliver it Saturday. It was Wednesday, and I was like, you're gonna have to get it today or tomorrow, because at that point, it's a
Yeah.
type of, I don't know if it's exactly dormant in the root, but if you cut a yucca open or you leave it on the counter, it gets too old. There are these black lines and dots inside of it. And it's a form of a fungus basically that gets inside of it. It's not that it's completely toxic, but it really messes with the integrity of like how it cooks. And it'll get
Mm.
firm, and it'll start to like fissure and open up. And I just in Costa Rica going, I'll have like just boiled roots, and it's so tender and fluffy. And then I come back here and I have it. I'm like, oh, could be better.
Wow, I had no idea. Yeah, I thought that wax was maybe borderline natural or something. It's so
What
hardy
that
when you buy it from
develops
the
on it.
store.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and we just like cut it in little pieces, and then we use a knife to shave off the outside layer. Is that kind of what you do too, or do you use like a potato peeler?
You could do that. The potato peeler, I think, is a lot harder, but you
Yeah.
could try this
Yeah.
I cut it into pieces like that
Yeah.
each. And then if I have it where like the exposed part is the top and this is like the bark on the outside, I'll use a knife and just barely cut it. And when you pop it under, it's like eighth of an inch of a little bit of bark around it. And you can
Oh,
slide the knife under and peel the whole thing clean.
gotcha.
That bark on it is like a little thin layer that comes off really easily. But you could also I just think the wax from the markets makes it harder to cut it sideways like that.
Okay. Lako, she's actually joining us live. Welcome, Lako. Mentions Ecoversity uses Kajabi also, saying it's very user
Oh,
friendly.
nice.
So just another doubling down on Kajabi. So thanks for chiming in, Lako.
Yeah, thank
Um,
you.
yeah, so sweet. Well, man, there's other topics I want to go over with you. So I was going to ask you about Raquel too. I don't know if you want to briefly talk about that. Also, Brandon wrote an awesome monograph for HerbRally. You could go to herballi.com/monographs/Raquel. That's RECAO. But I don't know if you want to touch on Raquel for a little bit and your love of that plant.
Yeah, totally. So recao is basically it's usually called culantro
Mm,
in more English speaking places. And it has a lot of different names throughout the world. And I think that it's compared to cilantro, but I think it's a lot stronger. It has more of like a depth of flavor. And it just it's a totally different plant. It's not even related to cilantro, but it really does taste exactly like that, but a lot stronger. That is a very key ingredient in a lot of Caribbean cooking, in what's called sometimes just a Caribbean green seasoning in the Caribbean. And in Puerto Rico, what's called sofrito. Sofrito is
mm,
basically cacao, onions, garlic, ají dulce, which is like a type of small sweet pepper that doesn't really have any heat to it.
mm.
Um, and plenty other things, just depending on who's making it, but that's the basis of it. And so those four ingredients, minced, chopped up, blended together, fresh, and then added onto the oil that really like gives a lot of flavor into the dish. It's very prominent as a culinary herb in that way, but it also has a lot of history being used medicinally. So Eryngium foetidum is the Latin name of it. It's a kind of basil growing plant where the leaves come out and the flowering stalk comes up. It's like less than a foot tall usually.
Mm.
And aside from the aromatics that, in the herbal sense, we can consider that it's a nice carminative, it's good for digestion, like a lot of the aromatic herbs that places cook with around the world. Aside from those things, the root is, in my opinion, like a relatively powerful, like antispasmodic.
Mm.
In some countries, it's also called fitweed, and in the sense of using it for fits which could be spasms. It could be kids that have stomach upset or kind of fussy and can't go to sleep. So the roots I've used before as a nervine, not in the sense that I would use it like milky oats or skullcap or something like that, but I might add it into a blend where maybe someone holds a lot of like anxiety in their stomach. Someone has to like go to the bathroom all the time and has their mind racing, and that sort of connection there. And it has a lot of history being used for that too, usually boiled as a tea or given to kids specifically as the main form of medicine for it. And it's a really easy to grow plant. It'll reach maturity and give seed and be ready for continuous harvest in like 2 months. And so in the beginning of starting the project, that was one of the biggest things that I was really growing a lot of that you can get at grocery stores, but at least in the South, and it depends on where you are, but they're not always really fresh. They don't always have a lot of flavor to them. And so growing it fresh is like it's the best
Are
way.
they calling it Raquel in grocery stores too? Or
It depends.
culantro?
So
Yeah.
like in Charlotte, we have this place called Compare Foods, which is a lot of like like Latin American things or Caribbean things. They'll write like Racao on it, or they might write culantro. Those are the two main ones. Things like fitweed, not really. Shadow benny is like what it's called in like Trinidad and Tobago. They don't really call it that in grocery stores. But I guess it just depends on where you are.
One of the reasons I love herbalism is because you could never be bored. I remember when you first approached me with this monograph, I was like, holy shit, I've never heard of Raquel before. And it's always, I love learning about new plants. And it's just now hitting me like, do you know if there's any sort of like language connection to cacao and Raquel? Because it's both ends in CAO. Do you have any idea about that?
I don't.
Okay.
It would be interested to see, because I think that things like CAO or GUA or some of these different linguistic parts, especially within the Americas and different cultures, has a background or a specific like origin. But I don't know specifically for that one. Now that you said it, I'm like, I thought of that before, but it hasn't been that big for me, but I'm going to research it until I find out. So I'll get back to you.
Yeah, we'll have to hear about that in the part 2. Awesome. Well, let's pivot a little bit. I remember this was a while ago, and I had to look it up on your Instagram to see if I was getting it right. I think it was a couple years ago. You were hosting a class called Herbs on an EBT. So what is that, like essentially food stamps, I want to say?
Yeah, herbalism with EBT, food stamps, yeah.
And I don't know if you know this, Brandon, but we've got like this free course. It's called The Art of Frugal Nutrition. And we're trying to build this growing library of classes where we're teaching people how to eat nutritious on a budget. And I just adored that you were doing that. I almost want to actually also, I looked at it today and I want to say your post got like 5,000 likes or some craziness like that. Very much resonated with people. And I was just kind of curious if you could talk about like the thesis or any like high level takeaways of what you taught about the herbs and EBT class.
Yeah, that whole class was basically focused on, because the project that I was talking about starting in Charlotte, that was focused on growing culturally relevant crops, but at the same time it also had a background on like accessibility of certain things, growing it, having it fresh. A lot of the things that we would grow, people might be able to find in a grocery store like frozen from some other part of the world, whereas getting it fresh just like changes up the ability to use it properly in certain dishes depending on where people are from. But when it comes to the accessibility of things, that was also a big part that at the beginning of the project especially was focused on, was like, how are we relating to and understanding having access to these plants, especially when you can go to a Whole Foods or whatever health food store and buy a tincture of something that is like $20, or if it's like a fancy brand in a boutique, it's even more. And rather like, how can we, not only from the project standpoint, it was like, how can we grow these things and have them more affordable, but also how do people learn how to do that themselves? And so the herbal accessibility, or the herbalism with EBT thing, was basically focused on what you can get off food stamps, what you can get that's really affordable from a grocery store, because you don't have to go to a specialty store. I think people kind of get taken aback and not as wanting to get into herbal medicine, depending on their viewpoint of it, because they think it's like a whole other world of things. But most people have a bunch of medicinal herbs in their pantry already in the
Right.
form of spices and cooking things, and so that's kind of the angle that I went with. It was like, you probably have a lot of these already. It doesn't need to be like St. John. It can, but it doesn't need to be like St. John's wort and holy basil and all these things. It can be cumin and cinnamon and thyme and things like that. There's plenty of recipes and things. And then the liquids and like the menstruums of medicine making was a big part of the class too. It was like
Mm.
we have apple cider vinegar and oils. I didn't really talk about alcohol, since you can't get that on EBT, or vegetable glycerin or something. But I
Good
think
point.
the food as medicine is kind of the biggest like takeaway of it, because if we're adding a lot of these things into our food, it's not like I'm taking these herbs to be very specific and drop doses, but I'm already incorporating them into what I have. So it might be like taking thyme and honey and apple cider vinegar and making a thyme oximal. Or one of the biggest ones that I've done, especially in the in-person classes talking about this accessibility, is fire cider, which
Mm.
is the epitome of that. You can probably under $15 get a little bottle of apple cider vinegar, a little thing of honey, an onion, ginger, a spicy pepper or two, garlic, and a piece of horseradish, and whatever other random things you want. Because that's the cool thing about it, is that these are not concrete recipes. You can find
Right.
them online, but people make them with sweet stuff. People make them with more aromatic plants. People make it more of an anise sort of like whatever you want. And so it's kind of like the culinary experimenting, as well as the fact that it's so easy to make something that, and fire cider is so dynamic. That's medicine for your sinus, for a cold and flu, for your digestive system, for your circulation in the wintertime. And it tastes good and it's nice. And, again, people usually have a lot of those things either dried out in their pantry for cooking, or you can get them for really cheap. So those sort of things have been the idea of that. And I've done courses before, my online ones. I haven't done this more recently, but I used to have an intro to herbal medicine online course that was also 5 weeks. And in that one, we talk about medicine making, and the homework was like, if you're able, try to make a medicine under $10 at the grocery store. And it can literally be a garlic honey or like a ginger vinegar or something like that, just things that are more accessible. That way people are doing that. And then also considering the cultural aspect, that these are usually not new things. Like while fire cider was given a name, it was done in that way. People have been brining and pickling stuff
Right.
for a long time with hot spices that is really good for, a cough or a cold. And so all of these things, it taps back into a lot of people's tradition, which is cool when I'm doing the courses or classes, and we're also talking about like our personal connection to it. People are like, oh, I remember my grandmother used to make that, or my mom used to cook this just the same way and add these spices into something. So there's also a lot of cultural connection, which is really cool, and it is accessible. It's really, really easy to get. So
The alcohol point was really good. I didn't even think about that, but it's so obvious now that you mention it. I love thinking of fire cider too as frugal herbalism. I've never thought of it that way, but of course, yeah, a little apple cider vinegar. I went through the store the other day, check out, and I want to say the onion was like 42 cents or something like that. So
yeah.
yeah, there's there's some really great options out there. Are you going to offer that class again at some point, you think?
I had an idea recently to do something like to make something more concrete with it, because I
Okay.
did that class and then I did a part two, which was
Mm.
like different recipes and things like that. And they both got really good response, but I think the format of doing a 2 hour class is kind of past, and I would love to do something written up. I would love to
Totally.
do like maybe even video based, more practical, in order to do that.
Totally.
Because it's kind of been inherent with a lot of the stuff that I already do. Like it's intersectional with the culturally relevant things or whatever
Yeah.
else. But I think I do want to kind of give it a spotlight again as its own thing soon. So yeah.
That was a great point too, the culturally relevant aspect. Yeah, of course, many cultures over millennia have been, infusing herbs into vinegar. It's not, but fire cider was very, very well coined by, I want to say, Rosemary Gladstar. Like that definitely like helped sell it for sure. But awesome. Well, I alluded to this earlier. we kind of briefly talked about the quote unquote every plant as a superfood, and I saw you post about that on Instagram too, which I thought was a really fun topic to ask you about. You also mentioned in that post something about the hibiscus cycle, which I thought was really unique. I'd never heard that before. So can you tell us why every plant is a superfood and the hibiscus cycle?
Yeah, so kind of going back to, like I said, when I was first getting into herbal medicine, the idea and the marketing behind a lot of different things is get this because it's really great for you, and it has fill in the blank, whatever comparison, this much times whatever. Like I'm sure you've seen like a moringa packet where they're like, compare the oranges,
Right.
it's got this much vitamin C. Compared to spinach, it's got this much iron. Compared to whatever, right? And sort of making out certain things to be really over the top and really great and really exotic. And like the plants and the ingredients are, but it becomes sort of a thing when it sort of caters to a lot of like diet culture and this very transactional way that we look at plants, where it's about taking a plant and being like, this one's so good and this one's even better. And this, I don't know if the word's like reductionist, but like the idea that more is better. Like the more moringa I take, the more great it's going to be. The more acai berries and maca and cacao and whatever else that we find in little packets is going to be even greater for me. And I think that I appreciate to an extent the way that world and that marketing exposed me to different things.
Sure.
But at the same time, it became harmful when you start to realize it's the sourcing behind it. It's the marketing for that. I had someone tell me before, they were like, the equivalent of doing maca powder is like the US selling potato flour to Peru. Because maca is like a starchy root that you cook and eat. It is good for you, like beets, for instance.
Sure.
But
beets is superfood.
Yeah, beets superfood, maca superfood, whatever. They all have their own background to like why they are so great for you.
Sure.
But I think the superfood marketing, it was kind of coined specifically to get people to consume more of that, which again, like I said, it perpetuates the idea of just like commodifying things, as well as distancing the relationship from it, because powders ship from across the world. And it's just like the more I get of this, the better. And I still see that a lot in, some of these smaller like boutique companies where it's like a blend of certain things, or like this very random like herb from some part of the world that's now in a tincture bottle, and it's like, this is whatever, and it's been wild crafted from the summit of whatever at 10,000 feet, and it's like cool. And honestly, when I was younger and I was getting into it, I was like, oh cool, like I want that.
Absolutely.
But then over time, it's like, that's because the marketing, and it's because this whole exotic, the new thing people want, So, and I talk a lot about that, I mean, in the class too, but something that I've developed, like you were saying, the hibiscus cycle is just kind of like a name that I gave that phenomenon, I guess.
Yeah.
And it can be filled in with a lot of different things. It's basically, the cycle is like 4 different stages. Hibiscus was one of them that I referenced as like, not the origin, but one of the things that has gone through that. You have a plant that originates somewhere. It originates actually in Northern Africa, where literally every part of the plant is used. The seed pods, the seeds themselves, the fiber of the stem, the roots, the calyxes, which we see more for the main medicine, the leaves, the flowers, right? And then ends up being introduced to a different part of the world, which varies with different plants of like how it got there. And over time, it settles in, especially, this is more of a modern thing I think I'm referencing, is where something becomes really popular. Hibiscus tea, or acai, or like I said, cacao, maca, kava kava, tons and tons of things that get like tons of marketing and a bunch of companies trying to produce it and sell it.
Right.
And then what happens is those plants become very expensive, very like niche marketing sort of things, and they end up being inaccessible to literally the same people that come from that culture or were originally able to access it. Seeing something like quinoa, growing, which now, and these things fluctuate, and there's so many different levels of conversations to it, because now you see stuff that's more affordable. Quinoa becomes a thing, and it's like, quinoa has this much more protein than rice, and this much more whatever than this grain and that, and it's like the whole competition nutrition thing. And then it becomes expensive because they say it's superfood. And then from there, that as a traditional grain for people maybe who have migrated from that part of the world or whatever, it's taken out of cultural context with how it's used, and it's a lot harder to access. Like hibiscus, for instance, if you've ever tried hibiscus, like a Jamaican sorrel drink or a Puerto Rican, like any sort of Caribbean and tropical way of how we make hibiscus, it's blood red. It's really dark. We use a lot, and it's usually got a good amount of sugar, maybe ginger, cinnamon, something like that. Um, and it's just so interesting to see hibiscus buying like a $10 thing of organic hibiscus tea bags. I might use the whole box for like one thing, because they put a little bit in where they say like the medicinal qualities. I'm sure you get some. Is it's tart, it's sour, it's cooling. Um, but that cultural context is taken out of place, and suddenly it's like that much for a handful of some pinched, dried up hibiscus to make a tea. So yeah, so there's a lot of levels to it, and I feel like I rant about this a lot, but it's
Totally.
that's kind of the basis. Yeah.
I resonated with so much of that. And I'm thinking to my early hippie days when I really first started getting into herbalism, I was buying like way too many goji berries. And I was probably spending most of my paycheck on goji berries because it was a sexy superfruit at the time. And it also, what you said something there earlier reminded me of like my early days as well, when I was like consuming lots of different like self-help and spiritual books. I was like, oh, this next book is going to be the thing that puts me over the edge. And you were kind of talking about like, oh, this next superfood's going to be the next thing. And I totally remember being like that as well. Like, oh, goji berries now, oh, maca now, oh, spirulina now. Like this is going to be the thing that gets my health to the next level. But really all we need is just like basic nourishment. And that could come from the form of something as cheap as an oat straw infusion. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't super glamorous or sexy, but it's got lots of vitamins and minerals in it, and super cheap as well. But they don't want to tell you that. The business and marketing machine doesn't want to tell you that. So
yeah, you put a nice label on that, and then you might make it a little more expensive.
Exactly.
So it's sometimes just that. It's the marketing.
Yeah.
And I see that happen with certain things. Yucca specifically, like I've seen at Whole Foods, like almost $20 for a pound of yucca flour.
Right.
When that's literally that's very cheap and very common in a lot of parts of the world because it's a very common crop. It's very accessible. And then with the marketing, it's not just yucca flour anymore. It's paleo, it's gluten-free.
Right.
And then it's like, oh, there's like other levels of why this is suddenly so expensive,
I might be misremembering, but in that Petty Herbalist podcast with you, I want to say Asia Dorsey might have even said sometimes it's cut with other flours as well. Is that?
Could have wheat flour in it, especially if it's one of those sort of things. A lot of times you get products from like, I will look more for a grocery store, like an African grocer, or because it as a flour is used especially more within a lot of parts of Africa and Asia. And the leaves also of yucca, sorry, random side note, but the leaves are really great too. You really don't see that in somewhere like a Whole Foods, but a lot of like Asian grocery stores will do yucca leaves. They're really nutritious. They're really amazing for you. And it's just, it's like every part, I mean, most parts of the plant being used, and at the same time, you have this cultural awareness from it, and to see something that people who can't afford much in certain countries have. All we have is yucca flour. Other side of the world, it's so much. It's just like mind blowing to see that.
Yeah. You sound like you're pretty fond of this yucca plant. So Lake was saying, I'm drinking the nettle infusion. Asia Dorsey taught me how to make in her winter herbal immersion course. Highly recommended. So that's cool. Yeah, more frugal nutrition in the form of nettle nourishing herbal infusion. Definitely consume that. So good. Yeah, absolutely.
Literally just like an overnight infusion of like nettle and like two other things like oat straw or whatever.
Can't go wrong.
And that's the perfect multivitamin. You don't need all the other stuff.
So true. Well, we're about an hour. I've got a couple more funsies questions for you if you got the time, Brandon.
Yeah, totally.
Awesome. And Leko, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the Q&A segment. Do you have any plans to write a book?
It's interesting you say that. I've been in the talks with the publisher more recently.
Nice.
about that and kind of navigating that because I've never done that before, kind of taking advice from good friends
Sure.
who have more experience with that. But I would definitely love to, regardless if that comes from having to navigate with a publisher or doing it myself. I've realized over time that I've accrued a lot of information in the form of notes and classes and this and that, and compiling it into something that is like you can hold in your hand is really important to me. And so, yeah, I definitely have been thinking about that. A couple different ideas, whether on the accessibility part, on the Caribbean herbal thing, that's been like a big one that has come up for me as something to compile a lot of that information internationally, not just, I love the idea, maybe that'll be a thing, excuse me, of, Puerto Rican herbal medicine, but through the Caribbean in general and the stories and the history and the tradition, I think that would be really cool. So,
yeah, when I think of Brandon Ruiz, I do think of the accessibility part. I also do think of the Caribbean herbalism part. So I think both of those are musts for sure, not to put work on you, but I also think a cookbook from you would be amazing as well because
yeah,
again, dear listener, if you want to check out Yuka Farms on Instagram, like you have an amazing like food, like just scrolling through your feed, there's so many good food posts. I just get so hungry scrolling through your feed, but a cookbook would be fantastic at some point as well.
Thanks. Yeah, I've thought of that, and that's definitely like a passion of mine. I mean, food and herb stuff in general, but especially cooking. I've done a little more cooking recently, but have definitely done in the past dinners and events, as like a chef. But I definitely want to further that in the coming years, and focus more on really developing myself as a chef because I think I'm very like home style right now, and but it would be cool to get both sides of like the tradition and getting family recipes and also being able to do a dish a certain way or take influences from different things and put them together. But I'm like a huge fan of seafood, so like fish.
I saw your fish post.
Yeah, I'm like, I feel like I have a lot of fish ones, some crab and rice or some fish that's roasted or fish this way. And so that's been like a lot of my inspiration. And I think it definitely is up here in the Northeast, but I need to tap into my not super expensive, but still fresh and local stuff. Cause you go down to the Carolinas, go by the coast and you can get really fresh stuff and just, yeah. So yes, cooking.
Someday.
I think I should do something about that too.
You're only 26. You got lots of time. So, so speaking of food, if you could ask either one of your abuelas to make you a meal, what would they? What would you have them cook for you?
Well, it's funny. I would say if I was asking my father's,
My father's the Polish
side,
one.
She would not because people got to cook it for her. She gets food made by people, and
respect.
She's a diva, and she gets good food. So for her, I'm not sure, but on my mother's side, I would say probably just like stewed chicken, like pollo guisado, with arroz con gandules or rice and pigeon peas, and some maybe like. Have you ever tried breadfruit? Are you familiar with breadfruit?
I heard you speak about it in that Petty Herbalist podcast, but I have to be honest, I've never had it before.
Breadfruit, we call it pana. It was originally from Polynesia and then was brought over. And I think what I referenced in that talk was that starchy tubers have always been more preferred by a lot of indigenous Caribbean cultures and African cultures. And breadfruit was brought over because it grew on a tree. It produced a lot of starch and a lot of food, and it could be a good source of food for enslaved populations, but was actually sort of pushed away and not really well adapted to originally, and then has become a big part of a lot of cuisine in a lot of tropical places. But those just like skinned, fried, mashed, and fried again, so tostones, which is like fried plantains, but with the breadfruit, is really, really good. So probably get that, some chicken with some rice, and that on the side. Yeah.
Sounds amazing. Soul food, comfort food, very comforting food. Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's kind of wrap things up. What's next for Brandon? Are you going to be going to more herb conferences this year, and just any projects you want to plug or promote?
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of a lot of the online education, I would really, like I said, I am going to be doing, it's kind of to be announced, to be determined when, the Caribbean herbal medicine course. I'm really looking to develop like a basis of the educational material to be able to offer these things consistently and automated, which I'm really glad that you've mentioned that website, the name of the skateboard, but yeah, or the platform to be able to do stuff, because I think that would be a really great way to reach more people. Being up in the Northeast, I'm looking to do more programming in person here, which I have some things coming up soon. Nothing super concrete. When it comes to gatherings and things, maybe here or there, but probably not as much as in the past, because I'm trying to kind of orient better into the place that I'm at now. But there's so much, not only in New York City, but just here and within this region, and a lot of people into this sort of thing. So I'm trying to really get in there. But with online, I'm always doing educational offerings, classes, the courses, the Caribbean herbal medicine course. It's funny, I finished the in-person one and I start an online one tomorrow, this first class. And so continuing that and just online programming, educational material, maybe the writing and stuff like that. So yeah, nothing super big coming up, but I feel very relieved and satisfied with how the in-person course went. It was really great, and that sort of inspired me to be like, I want to make sure I get to another level of how I really interact with people when it comes to the in-person offerings, medicine making and using things. And it's cold now, but I like to brave it. If we can make medicine and things like that in classes. So I think coming up into early spring and stuff, especially in the Northeast, a lot of stuff coming up. So
I want to say you had a class called "It's Fucking Hot." Maybe you'll teach a class called "It's Fucking Cold."
Yeah, it's fucking cold. Yeah, honestly, I used to do. I think last year I did like a winter herbalism 3-part series. There was an herbal. I can't remember all 3 parts. I know one of them was all food based. It was like making warming, circulatory, herbal meals. Another one was about the herbal medicine aspect of it. Second one is escaping me. But yeah, I've tried to go by the seasons too. And I think that being somewhere with so many different platforms and places, I'm hoping to do that also in person. It's nice to be inside. It's nice to be on the computer, but I like to more in person. We can do a lot more, especially make things, and so, yeah, maybe I will do It's Fucking Cold, because it is.
Well, yeah, speaking of fire cider, I mean, I want to say World Fire Cider Making Day is February 2nd. We're recording this on February 20th, but what a great warming herbal medicine for the wintertime. And just because you're new to the New York City area, I don't know if you're aware of the Arbor Vitae School of Herbalism, but there's a herb school there called Arbor Vitae that could be worth looking into. And I want to say the executive director of Herbalists Without Borders, Jocelyn Perez Blanco, lives in New York City, as well as one of their volunteers, Laura Rubin. So there's lots of herbalists in New York City. It's cool to see that you're living there now and just doing all of this awesome work. Sweet, Brandon. Well, this has been a lot of fun. Any closing thoughts before we wrap up and get out of here?
Not really. Thank you for letting me know of those resources, for sure. Yeah, definitely in connecting and things like that. But nothing that's really coming up now. I appreciate it, and always admire your work and what you do. Yes. And it's always cool. It's very refreshing to be able to get on calls like this or do these things, because it's like when leaving the course that I just did, it's like you're completely immersed, and then you get out of it, and I'm like, talking to someone
back in New York City.
You're still there, you're into it too. Yeah. Totally. So very refreshing talk, and thank you.
Absolutely. No, it was great to have you on, to get to know you and your story a little bit more, and finally have this chat. Thanks to everyone for listening. Thanks to HerbRally Schoolhouse member Lako for joining us. Shout out and thanks to Amanda for editing, and we'll see y'all in the next episode of the Herbalist Hour. Take care, everybody.
Thanks so.
Thanks so much for watching today's episode of the Herbalist Hour. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want more great herbal content, be sure to subscribe to our HerbRally YouTube channel. If you enjoy these Herbalist Hour episodes and you'd like to join us live, you can do so by becoming an HerbRally Schoolhouse member. Learn more at herbrally.com/schoolhouse. And if you want to get your first 30 days for free, use coupon code YouTube30 at checkout. So our HerbRally Schoolhouse members get access to exclusive video classes, monographs, and a lot lot more herbal community discounts, along with joining these live Herbalist Hour interviews. So one more time, herbrally.com/schoolhouse. Enter coupon code YouTube30 at checkout to get your first 30 days for free. All right, we'll see you in the next episode, and take care.